June 19, 1944, over the Philippine Sea, the largest carrier battle in history erupts, and in one single day, more than 300 Japanese planes fall from the sky. The Americans lose barely 20 aircraft in return, and the reason is a secret fuse no Japanese pilot ever saw coming. This is the Battle of the Philippine Sea, the engagement history would remember as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. By June 1944, the war in the Pacific had reached a turning point the Japanese command had long dreaded. American forces were driving westward across the Pacific, island by island, and their next target was the Mariana Chain itself. The Marianas mattered because they sat squarely inside the planned flight path of the new B-29 bomber raids on Japan itself. So the Imperial Japanese Navy committed its entire remaining carrier fleet to stop the American invasion before it could begin. Opposite them steamed the American Fifth Fleet, 9 fleet carriers and 8 light carriers carrying more than 900 aircraft. It was the largest concentration of carrier air power either navy had ever assembled in one place. But the real imbalance was not in ships. It was in the men who flew the planes off their decks. American aviators in the Pacific typically had more than 300 hours of flight time before they ever saw combat. Many Japanese replacements, however, went into battle with barely 100 hours and far too little gunnery practice. Japan's elite carrier pilots, the veterans of Pearl Harbor and Midway, had been ground down in 3 years of attrition. Their training pipeline could not replace them, so the gaps were filled with boys pulled straight from accelerated flight school. On the morning of June 19th, the Japanese launched the largest carrier strike wave of the entire war. More than 300 Japanese planes rose from their carriers that morning, aimed straight at the American fleet. But waiting for them, radar had already painted the raid on American screens more than 100 miles out. American fighter directors on the carriers calmly plotted the incoming raid and vectored their Hellcats to meet it. The Grumman F-6F Hellcat was faster, tougher, and better armed than anything the Japanese could put in the air that day. But the decisive weapon in that sky was not the fighter plane at all, it was the shell it carried. The proximity fuse was a miniature radio transmitter inside the nose of every 5-inch shell that fired a signal as it closed on its target. The moment that shell passed within 70 feet of an aircraft, the fuse detonated it automatically, no direct hit required. That single innovation multiplied the killing power of every anti-aircraft gun on the American ships many times over. Before the fuse, an anti-aircraft shell had to score a direct hit to bring a plane down, a rare and difficult thing. Now a shell passing anywhere near the target would shred it with a burst of white-hot steel fragments. The fuse was so secret that the United States Navy had refused to use it anywhere the enemy might recover an unexploded round. It had first been used in combat in January 1943, only in the Pacific, where the ocean made recovery unlikely. The Japanese never recovered the secret from the sea, so the fuse arrived at the Philippine Sea as a complete surprise. On the morning of June 19th, the first Japanese strike wave flew straight into a wall of Hellcats and flak. American radar had given the fleet 20 minutes of warning, time enough to get every fighter airborne and waiting. The Japanese pilots who came at them were brave, but they were flying tired aircraft with green crews against veterans. In the first great wave of the morning, the Americans broke up the Japanese formations before they ever reached the fleet. Of the roughly 69 aircraft in that first Japanese strike wave, 42 never made it back to their carriers. The second Japanese wave that morning fared no better, losing more than 90 of its 128 aircraft. And the third wave, roughly 47 planes, was turned back with more than half of them destroyed. By the end of that single day, American fighters and gunners had downed more than 300 Japanese aircraft. American losses for the entire day numbered just 29 aircraft in combat. The disparity was so complete that one American pilot famously radioed back, quote, "Hell, this is like an old-time turkey shoot." That phrase, picked up on the radio chatter, gave the entire battle its enduring nickname. But the air battle was only half the story, because the Japanese carriers themselves had not yet been touched. Late in the afternoon, American scout aircraft finally located the Japanese fleet at the extreme edge of their striking range. Admiral Mark Mitcher faced a brutal choice: to launch a strike so far out that his planes might not make it back. He gave the order to launch anyway, sending more than 200 aircraft on the longest carrier strike of the war. The strike caught the Japanese carriers in the act of refueling and rearming their surviving aircraft. American dive bombers struck the carriers Hio, Shikaku, and Teiho, and the results were catastrophic. The Teiho, Japan's newest and largest carrier, sank after a single well-placed torpedo ignited her aviation fuel. The Shikaku, a veteran of the attack on Pearl Harbor, went down the same afternoon with heavy loss of life. By nightfall, 3 Japanese carriers lay at the bottom, and the remaining air groups had been all but destroyed. In the dark, the American strike planes returned to a fleet that had turned on every light to guide them home. That night, American destroyers moved through the dark sea to pick up every pilot they could find. The planes had come home in darkness, running on fumes, and many had ditched in the sea short of the fleet. Of the more than 200 aircraft launched that afternoon, nearly 80 were lost to fuel and night landings. Yet the aggressive rescue effort meant that only about 16 American pilots were lost in the water that night. When the sun rose on June 20th, the scale of Japan's defeat had become fully clear. Japanese carrier aviation had lost the bulk of its trained aircrews in a single afternoon of combat. The Japanese fleet commander, Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa, had no choice but to order a retreat north. The American pursuit was cautious, and the surviving Japanese ships slipped away into the western Pacific. The battle had cost Japan 3 carriers and more than 400 aircraft in total. American losses for the entire 2-day engagement numbered about 123 aircraft. But the real damage was not counted in hulls or wings, but in trained men who could never be replaced. Japan's most experienced pilots had died in those 2 days, men whose skills took years to develop. From this point forward, Japanese carriers would never again mount a major offensive air operation. The Philippine Sea effectively destroyed Japanese carrier aviation as a strategic offensive force. The victory opened the way for the capture of the Marianas and the start of the B-29 campaign against Japan. Within weeks, American forces stormed ashore on Saipan, and the airfields for those bombers were soon under construction. But the Marianas campaign was far from over, because the fight for the islands themselves had only just begun. On June 15, 1944, American Marines had already waded ashore on Saipan, days before the carrier battle reached its climax. The garrison defending Saipan numbered more than 30,000 determined Japanese troops, many of them seasoned veterans. The island's commander, Lieutenant General Yoshitsugu Sato, had no intention of surrendering a single yard of ground. The Americans expected to take Saipan in a matter of days, but the fighting would drag on for more than 3 brutal weeks. The terrain favored the defenders, a rugged coral landscape riddled with caves and sheer cliffs that made every advance costly. The Japanese defenders had spent months preparing elaborate defenses, turning the island into a fortress of interlocking fire. Among the most haunting features of Saipan was its civilian population, including thousands of Japanese settlers who had made the island home. As the American line pushed north, the Japanese command issued orders that would lead to one of the war's most tragic episodes. In early July, with defeat inevitable, the surviving Japanese forces prepared a final mass assault against the American lines. On the night of July 6th, thousands of Japanese soldiers launched a desperate banzai charge straight into the American positions. The charge crashed against a thin American line, and by dawn, the assault had been broken at enormous cost to the attackers. The fighting on Saipan was declared over on July 9th, but the cost had been staggering for both sides. More than 3,000 American troops had fallen on Saipan, while the Japanese garrison was almost entirely destroyed. The capture of Saipan put American forces squarely within range of the Japanese home islands for the first time in the war. Within months, American engineers transformed the island into a giant airbase, and the B-29 campaign against Japan was about to begin. But the B-29 campaign would not begin smoothly, because the path from the Marianas to Tokyo ran through a sky thick with flak and fighters. The first B-29 raid on Japan, launched from bases in China, had already proved the bomber's power, but also its terrible vulnerability. That first strike, known as Operation Matterhorn, had flown from Chinese airfields and reached only the southern edge of Japan's industrial heartland. The raids from China were difficult because every ton of fuel and bombs had to be flown in over the Himalayan mountains known as the Hump. The Marianas changed everything because an island airfield could be supplied by ship, not by a fragile lifeline over the mountains. Starting in late 1944, American engineers carved giant runways out of the coral of Saipan, Tinian, and Guam. The island of Tinian, just south of Saipan, would become the single largest bomber base ever built in the Pacific. By early 1945, the 20th Air Force had launched the first massed raids from the Marianas against the Japanese home islands. These early high-altitude raids, dropping precision bombs by daylight, proved far less effective than the planners had hoped. The jet stream winds over Japan, reaching speeds of over 150 miles per hour, scattered the bomb loads wildly. The answer came from a new commander, Major General Curtis LeMay, who took over the bombing campaign in early 1945. LeMay made a radical decision, ordering his bombers to fly lower at night and to drop incendiary bombs instead of high explosives. On the night of March 9, 1945, Operation Meeting House sent 334 B-29s over Tokyo in the most destructive air raid in history. The firestorm that night consumed more than 15 square miles of Tokyo and killed more people than the atomic bomb at Hiroshima would later claim. The raids continued through the spring, and by summer, the B-29 campaign had devastated Japan's industrial capacity beyond recovery. But Japan still refused to surrender, and the war would demand one final, terrible act before it could end. To understand why the Philippine Sea battle turned so one-sided, we have to go back to the pilots themselves. By 1944, the Japanese Navy had lost a catastrophic number of its most experienced aviators. The cream of Japan's carrier air groups had been lost in the Solomons and at the Battle of Midway 2 years earlier. To fill the empty cockpits, the Japanese rushed barely trained replacements into the front line. Many of these new pilots had logged barely 100 hours of total flight time before their first combat mission. Their American counterparts, by contrast, often had 200 or more hours, and many were combat veterans. Experience alone would have tilted the scales, but the Americans also held a decisive technological edge. Their fighters, the Grumman F-6F Hellcat, were faster, tougher, and more heavily armed than the Japanese Zero. The Hellcat could outdive the Zero and absorb far more battle damage before coming apart. And the American pilots had learned hard lessons in the earlier battles, evolving tactics that exploited every weakness. They knew the Zero was lightly armored and would burn if struck in the right place, so they aimed for the wings and fuel tanks. But the most decisive advantage of all was not carried in the fighters, but in the guns of the American fleet itself. That advantage was the proximity fuse, a tiny radio device built into the nose of every anti-aircraft shell. Ordinary shells used a timer and could only explode at a preset moment, often missing entirely. The proximity fuse instead detonated the moment it sensed an aircraft passing within about 70 feet. A near miss that would have done nothing before now tore a plane apart with a shower of steel fragments. When a Japanese aircraft came within 70 feet of an American shell, the fuse's tiny radio transmitter triggered the explosion instantly. The fuse was developed in total secrecy, and its existence was so protected that it was never used over land where it could fall into enemy hands. Only the Navy could use it freely, because a dud shell falling on the open ocean could never be recovered and reverse-engineered by the enemy. On the morning of June 19th, the Japanese launched their first massed strike wave against the American fleet. American radar picked up the incoming raid while it was still more than 100 miles away, giving the fleet precious warning time. American fighters were launched and vectored out to meet the Japanese long before they ever reached the carriers. The Hellcats dove into the Japanese formation and the slaughter began, with veteran pilots picking off the inexperienced attackers one by one. Those Japanese planes that slipped past the fighters then ran headlong into the wall of proximity-fused fire from the American ships. Each proximity-fused shell burst close enough to shred an aircraft, and the sky filled with falling wreckage. The Japanese pilots, many flying their very first combat mission, had no answer for fire that exploded around them from every direction. Wave after wave pressed the attack, and wave after wave was broken up and driven back before reaching the American carriers. In the first strike alone, the Japanese lost more than 40 aircraft before a single bomb reached an American ship. By midday, the Japanese had launched 4 major strikes, and each one met the same devastating reception. American pilots radioed back colorful reports of the carnage, and one of them gave the battle its famous nickname. He compared the one-sided shooting to an old-fashioned turkey shoot, and the name stuck with the battle forever after. But the day was not yet over, because the Japanese still had one more card to play beneath the waves. As the last of the Japanese strike aircraft turned for home, the Imperial Navy still held one desperate hope. That hope was the Japanese submarine fleet, ordered to slip beneath the American screen and strike at the carriers from below. But the American destroyers and their escorts had spent years perfecting the hunt for exactly this kind of threat. In fact, the American carrier force had already detected and destroyed the Japanese submarine picket line the day before the battle began. That early warning had stripped the Japanese fleet of its eyes and left the way open for the American submarines to counterattack. While the Japanese aircraft were being broken up overhead, American submarines were closing on the heart of the enemy fleet. The submarine USS Albacore was the first to find a target, a massive Japanese carrier named the Teiho. The Teiho was the newest and largest carrier in the Japanese fleet, a heavily armored giant they could not afford to lose. Albacore fired a spread of 6 torpedoes, and one of them struck home against the Teiho's hull. At first, the damage seemed minor, and the Teiho's crew believed the single hit would not stop their ship. But the torpedo had ruptured a fuel line, and volatile aviation gasoline vapors began spreading through the ship. The Teiho's damage control officers made a fatal decision, ordering the ventilation system to be run at full power. That order only spread the explosive vapors faster through every compartment of the great ship. Hours later, a small spark ignited the accumulated vapor, and the Teiho was torn apart by a massive explosion. Within minutes, the largest carrier in the Japanese fleet slipped beneath the waves, taking most of its crew with it. The loss of the Teiho was a staggering blow, but the Japanese fleet had not yet felt the worst of what that day held. But the worst was still to come, because the American submarine fleet had more than one torpedo left to fire. Later that afternoon, the submarine USS Cavalier sighted a second Japanese carrier, the Shikaku, and closed in for the attack. The Shikaku was a veteran of the attack on Pearl Harbor and one of the most experienced carriers in the Japanese fleet. Cavalier fired a spread of 6 torpedoes, and 3 of them struck the Shikaku along its starboard side. Unlike the Teiho, the Shikaku sank quickly, going down within roughly an hour of the first hit. In a single afternoon, American submarines had sent 2 of Japan's finest carriers to the bottom of the Philippine Sea. Yet the Japanese carrier force still had one more ship that might turn the battle around, the giant new carrier Zuikaku. But the American carriers had a plan of their own, and their aircraft were already preparing to strike back. Late in the afternoon of June 20th, American scout planes finally located the retreating Japanese fleet. The problem was that the Japanese fleet lay at the very edge of the American aircraft's range, well over 200 miles away. Admiral Mark Mitchell made the difficult call to launch the strike anyway, knowing many planes would not have fuel for the return trip. So the American strike aircraft launched into the fading light, flying the longest carrier strike of the entire Pacific War. They struck the Japanese fleet as the sun went down, and in the chaos they managed to sink yet another carrier, the Hiyu. The Hiyu was the 3rd Japanese carrier lost that day, and the 4th would go down later that night. But the strike came at a terrible price, because the return flight to the American carriers took the planes deep into the night. Hundreds of American aviators ran out of fuel over the open water, and many were forced to ditch their planes into the sea. The night rescue that followed became one of the most remarkable operations in the history of naval aviation. Admiral Mitchell made a decision that would save many of those downed pilots, ordering every carrier to turn on every light in the fleet. Illuminating the fleet was a dangerous gamble, because the glow could reveal the carriers to enemy submarines lurking nearby. Mitchell calculated that the risk to the fleet was worth the chance of bringing his aviators home alive. Throughout the night, returning aircraft splashed down beside the carriers, and destroyers raced in to pull the crews from the water. By dawn, the American fleet had recovered more than 200 of the aviators who had ditched into the sea. Still, the toll was heavy, for nearly 50 American aircraft and their crews were lost in that single night of recovery. When the full tally was counted, the battle had cost the Japanese more than 400 aircraft and 3 carriers. The Americans lost 123 aircraft in total, but more than half of their pilots were recovered alive. In the air-to-air combat alone, the Japanese had lost roughly 315 aircraft against a mere 29 American fighters. The disparity in losses revealed a deeper truth, that the Japanese carrier air arm had been broken as a fighting force. The experienced pilots Japan had lost at Midway 2 years earlier could never be replaced, and now their successors were gone too. From this point forward, Japanese carriers would be reduced to little more than decoys, since they had almost no trained pilots left to fly. The battle also opened the door to the Marianas themselves, and American forces moved quickly to seize the islands. Within weeks, American forces had captured the islands of Saipan, Guam, and Tinian after some of the bitterest fighting of the war. And with those islands secure, the United States finally had airfields close enough to bring the full weight of the B-29 bomber to bear on Japan. The fall of the Marianas also sealed the fate of the Japanese government, for the cabinet of Prime Minister Tojo collapsed within weeks. Hideki Tojo, who had led Japan since the opening of the Pacific War, resigned his post on July 18, 1944. His government had promised the Japanese people victory, and the loss of the Marianas made that promise impossible to keep. The strategic consequences of the battle reached far beyond the Pacific, because the new airfields now threatened the Japanese home islands directly. From the airfields on Tinian and Saipan, the first Boeing B-29 Superfortress raids against Japan itself began as early as November of 1944. The B-29 could carry a bomb load of 20,000 pounds over a range of more than 3,000 miles, something no earlier bomber could match. Had the Marianas campaign failed, the B-29 would have had no base from which to reach Japan's major industrial cities. So the victory at the Philippine Sea was not merely a naval triumph, it was the foundation upon which the strategic bombing of Japan was built. The battle also transformed the balance of naval power in the Pacific for the remainder of the war. The Japanese combined fleet was effectively finished as an offensive force, and it would never again launch a major carrier operation. The next time Japanese carriers put to sea in force, at the Battle of Leyte Gulf in October, they would serve largely as decoys. American naval aviators, by contrast, would go on to dominate the skies over Leyte, Okinawa, and the waters around Japan itself. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot also reshaped how the United States Navy would think about air defense for the rest of the war. The combination of radar-directed fighters, the proximity fuse, and coordinated gunfire became the template for carrier defense for decades. And the lessons of pilot training, that quality and experience saved lives, would echo through American naval aviation for generations. But the story of the Pacific War was far from over, and the next great battle would be fought on an island called Leyte. Leyte Gulf, in October of 1944, would become the largest naval battle ever fought. But before that clash, the Americans still had to consolidate their hold on the newly won Marianas. The airfields on Saipan and Tinian were pushed forward with extraordinary speed to receive the new bombers. Yet the very success of the Philippine Sea campaign had created a new problem for the American command. The enemy fleet had slipped away largely intact, and it would have to be hunted down again. For the Japanese, the loss of the Marianas triggered a desperate rethinking of their entire war strategy. Their new plan, known as Operation Show, called for a final decisive battle against the American fleet. Operation Show was built on the painful recognition that the carrier forces could no longer win alone. So the Japanese plan now hinged on their mighty battleships, including the two largest ever built. These were the super battleships Yamato and Musashi, each displacing more than 70,000 tons. Their main guns fired shells weighing more than 3,000 pounds, the heaviest ever mounted at sea. The Japanese intended to lure the American fleet into a decisive surface battle where these guns could decide the war. The bait for this trap would be the Japanese carrier force, now stripped of most of its trained pilots. They hoped the sight of the carriers would draw the American fleet into range of the waiting battleships. But the American codebreakers had already read enough of the Japanese signals to know a major move was coming. Admiral Halsey's Third Fleet was positioned to meet the Japanese head-on as they approached the Philippines. The scale of the coming confrontation was staggering, with more than 200,000 men about to clash across the Philippine archipelago. The Battle of Leyte Gulf would prove to be the largest naval engagement in human history, measured by the tonnage of the fleets involved. But before that climax, the American command faced two urgent tasks that would shape the entire campaign. The first was to secure the airfields on Leyte itself, so that land-based aircraft could support the invasion fleet. The second was to hunt down the Japanese fleet that had slipped away from the Marianas and finish it for good. The invasion of Leyte began on October 20th, 1944, with the largest amphibious assault ever mounted in the Pacific. General Douglas MacArthur waded ashore on that first day, fulfilling his famous promise to return to the Philippines. The Japanese response to the invasion was the activation of Operation Show, their final decisive battle plan. The plan divided the Japanese fleet into several forces, each with a separate route and a single shared objective. The bait force of carriers would sail from the north, while the powerful battleship groups approached through the central islands. The battleship Yamato and her sister Musashi would lead the central force through the narrow San Bernardino Strait. Another battleship force under Vice Admiral Nishimura would thread the southern passage through Surigao Strait. The entire operation depended on the American fleet being drawn north by the decoy carriers, leaving the straits open. The American submarines made the first move, sinking two heavy cruisers from the Japanese fleet before the surface battle even began. On the night of October 24th, the American fleet moved to block the southern approach at the Surigao Strait. There, in the narrow waters of the strait, the American battle line would cross the Japanese path in the classic T formation. The American battleships, under Rear Admiral Jesse Oldendorf, formed a line across the strait, their guns trained on the narrow passage ahead. The Japanese battleships Fuso and Yamashiro steamed straight into the trap, unaware that the entire American line was waiting for them. In the early hours of October 25th, the American destroyers launched their torpedo attacks on the advancing Japanese column. The battleship Fuso was struck and broken in two, the first capital ship lost to the American guns that night. Then the full American battle line opened fire, concentrating every heavy gun on the surviving Japanese battleship Yamashiro. Oldendorf had crossed the Japanese T, the classic naval maneuver that let his entire line fire, while the enemy could answer with only their forward guns. Within minutes, the Yamashiro was overwhelmed, rolling over and sinking with her admiral and most of her crew still aboard. The southern Japanese force was essentially annihilated, with only a single destroyer managing to escape the Surigao Strait. But while the battle raged at Surigao, the main Japanese battleship force under Admiral Kurita was pushing through the San Bernardino Strait unopposed. Admiral Halsey had taken his entire fast carrier force north to chase the decoy carriers, leaving the strait wide open. That decision left the American invasion fleet at Leyte, defended only by a small group of escort carriers and destroyers. On the morning of October 25th, Kurita's battleships emerged from the strait and found these thin-skinned ships directly in their path. What followed became known as the Battle off Samar, one of the most desperate and lopsided engagements in naval history. The escort carriers launched every aircraft they had, while their destroyers charged the giant battleships with torpedoes and smoke screens. In an astonishing turn, the escort carriers and their aircraft managed to sink several heavy Japanese cruisers and force the fleet to turn away. Kurita, believing he faced the full American fleet, broke off the attack and retreated, leaving the invasion force intact. The battle off Samar ended in a stunning American defensive victory, but the larger Philippine Sea campaign was far from over. Admiral Kurita's retreat left his battleship force intact, and the Americans knew they had to find it again. By late October, American carrier aircraft hunted down the retreating Japanese ships in the waters off the Philippines. The mighty battleship Musashi, sister ship to the Yamato, was finally sunk after absorbing an extraordinary number of hits. That same night, the American battle line annihilated the southern Japanese force in the Surigao Strait. The Japanese fleet had lost 4 aircraft carriers, 3 battleships, and 10 cruisers across the entire campaign. The Imperial Japanese Navy would never again fight a fleet action on this scale, its carrier force effectively finished. But the Japanese had one final, desperate weapon to throw at the American fleet at Leyte. That weapon was the Kamikaze, the organized suicide attack that would define the final year of the Pacific War. On October 25, 1944, the first organized kamikaze units struck the American fleet near Leyte. The escort carrier St. Lo was struck and sunk by a kamikaze, the first American ship lost to this new tactic. The kamikaze tactic signaled a profound shift, trading trained pilots for one-way missions in a war already lost. Yet even the kamikaze could not stop the American advance, as the invasion of Luzon began in January 1945. The Philippine campaign, begun with the Marianas, had broken the back of the Japanese fleet and its air arm. From the Marianas, the new Boeing B-29 bombers were now within range of the Japanese home islands. And on November 24, 1944, the first B-29 raid struck Tokyo, launched from the very Airfields I in the Marianas. Those B-29 raids marked the beginning of the end, as American bombers now struck the Japanese home islands almost at will. Yet the Pacific campaign that had begun at Pearl Harbor still had nearly a year of brutal fighting ahead. The capture of Iwo Jima in February 1945 gave the bombers a vital emergency landing strip close to Japan. And the seizure of Okinawa that spring placed American forces within striking distance of the Japanese mainland itself. Each of these campaigns came at a heavy cost, but they steadily narrowed the ring around the Japanese home islands. By mid-1945, American submarines and aircraft had effectively severed Japan's vital supply lines from Southeast Asia. With its oil imports nearly gone, the Japanese fleet was largely confined to port, unable to fight as it once had. The air war over Japan intensified through the spring, culminating in the devastating firebombing raids on its major cities. The raid on Tokyo in March 1945 remains one of the most destructive air attacks in history. Yet the Japanese government refused to surrender, preparing a vast defensive force for the expected invasion of their homeland. American planners, looking at the carnage of Iwo Jima and Okinawa, dreaded the cost of an invasion of the home islands. In August 1945, the decision was made to use a new weapon rather than risk a ground invasion of Japan. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, together with the Soviet entry into the war, finally brought about Japan's surrender. On September 2, 1945, the instruments of surrender were signed aboard the battleship Missouri in Tokyo Bay. World War II in the Pacific had finally come to an end, more than 3.5 years after the attack on Pearl Harbor. And the road to that surrender ran directly through the Marianas, where the Turkey Shoot had first broken Japan's air power. The Marianas Campaign and the air battle that opened it had reshaped the entire Pacific War in a matter of months. The destruction of Japan's carrier air groups in June 1944 had consequences that reached far beyond that single day. With so many veteran aviators lost, Japan could never rebuild the quality of its naval air arm. The pilots who replaced them went into combat with barely a fraction of the training their predecessors had received. This widening gap in pilot skill would prove decisive in every air engagement that followed in the Pacific. The proximity fuse, kept secret throughout the war, had given American gunners an enormous technical advantage. American intelligence worked hard to keep that secret, forbidding its use where the fuse might fall into enemy hands. So closely was it held that the fuse was never permitted over land, for fear the enemy might recover one intact. The same technical edge that protected American ships would soon be turned against German forces in Europe. In the European theater, the proximity fuse proved equally deadly against the German V-1 flying bombs. British gunners using the fuse destroyed a large share of the V-1s aimed at London in the summer of 1944. The same fuse that had broken Japan's air power at the Marianas also helped shield London from the new German terror weapon. By the end of the war, the proximity fuse had proven one of the most important technical innovations of the entire conflict. Historians rank the fuse alongside radar and the atomic bomb among the decisive technologies of the Second World War. Yet the Turkey Shoot itself was more than a story of technology. It was a story of training, readiness, and sheer preparation. The American advantage rested on years of accumulated experience, superior doctrine, and a navy that could learn and adapt faster. The Battle of the Philippine Sea stands as a masterclass in how preparation, not luck, decides the outcome of war. The lessons of that June day were studied for decades by every major navy in the world. American carrier doctrine, hammered out in the brutal campaigns of 1942 and 43, proved its worth here. The Japanese Navy, by contrast, had learned its most costly lessons in a way it could never recover from. For the veterans who survived the Turkey Shoot, it was a day they would carry with them for the rest of their lives. The battle also reshaped how the world thought about the aircraft carrier as the decisive weapon at sea. Naval historians point to June 19, 1944, as the moment the battleship finally yielded to the carrier. In the decades after the war, the proximity fuse's secrets were finally declassified and told to the public. Today, the phrase Turkey Shoot remains a sober reminder of what happens when technology and training meet unpreparedness. It was a day that did not win the war alone, but it made every American victory that followed immeasurably easier. If you found this account of the Pacific War instructive, subscribe to Colonel Mittens and join us for the next Forgotten Front.